Some American surnames were not built to last. A boy buys his first boat after plowing rocky fields. A ledger tracks a tithe down to the penny. Stone mills hum beside the house where the family sleeps. One family's name would end up watched by the whole country in the 1970s, for reasons people still argue about. Vanderbilt. In May of 1810, a 16-year-old named Cornelius Vanderbilt stood on the deck of a two-masted ferry boat in New York Harbor. His mother lent him $100 after he agreed to plow and plant 8 rocky acres of her farm before his birthday, and he used the money to buy the boat outright. The family name itself came from a Dutch farmer, Jan Artsoen, who left the village of De Bilt in the Netherlands in 1650 and arrived in New Amsterdam as an indentured servant. Over generations, Vanderbilt, from the Bilt, hardened into a single surname. During 1863, Cornelius Vanderbilt took control of the New York and Harlem Railroad, turning the family's rise decisively toward railroads. By the time he died in 1877, he was worth roughly $100 million, a sum that at the time outweighed the entire United States Treasury. Nearly all of it went to William, while the other surviving children received far less, and several challenged the will in court. Grand houses on Fifth Avenue and in Newport went up, and later came down or changed hands entirely. Today, journalist Anderson Cooper carries Vanderbilt blood through his mother, but not the surname, leaving one family question open. What survives when the name and the bloodline no longer travel together? Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie was born in Dunfermline, Scotland, on November 25, 1835, the son of a handloom weaver named William Carnegie, who wove fine damask linen by hand. The Carnegie surname comes from a Scottish place name near Carmely in Angus, probably Gaelic for Fort at the Gap. In 1847, steam-powered looms reached Dunfermline, and William's handloom business dwindled as hundreds of weavers lost work. The family sold the looms at a loss, borrowed £20 from neighbors, and in May of 1848, boarded a former whaling ship bound for the United States. 12-year-old Andrew went to work in a cotton mill in Allegheny, Pennsylvania, spending 12-hour days in a dark cellar, feeding wood chips into a small steam boiler, earning about $1.20 a week. During 1853, Andrew Carnegie joined the Pennsylvania Railroad under Thomas Scott, opening the path from wages into investment, steel, and eventually philanthropy. By the time he died, Carnegie had funded over 2,500 public libraries worldwide, roughly 1,700 of them in the United States, and given away about 90% of his fortune. Carnegie had only one child, Margaret, so his direct descendants continued under other surnames. Today his name survives mostly on library cornerstones, foundations, and university buildings. Had those steam looms never reached Dunfermline, American steel might have had a very different first name. Astor. 7 wooden German flutes sat inside John Jacob Astor's luggage when he sailed for America in November of 1783, bought cheaply from his brother in London to resell in the New World. The ship spent nearly 2 months frozen into the ice of Chesapeake Bay, and Astor did not actually step ashore near Baltimore until March of 1784. Astor comes from the old Occitan word for goshawk. John Jacob was a butcher's son from the small German town of Waldorf, with about $75 saved before he left. In early 1784, Astor reportedly met a fur trader during that icebound delay, and the flute business gave way to beaver pelts. By 1808, he had built the American Fur Company into a fur trading network stretching from the Great Lakes to the Pacific coast, and by his death in 1848, he was worth an estimated $20 million, the wealthiest man in the country at the time. His descendants built the Waldorf Astoria by joining rival hotels raised by feuding Astor cousins. Today, a British branch of the family still carries the Viscount Astor title. The name later took a very different kind of hit. In 2009, Brooke Astor's own son, Anthony Marshall, was convicted of grand larceny for stealing millions from his mother while she suffered from Alzheimer's disease. Had the ice not held that ship for 2 extra months in 1783, the Astor fortune might never have been built on fur at all. DuPont. The surname simply means from the bridge in French. Eleuthère Irénée DuPont reached America with his family in 1800, fleeing revolutionary France, having studied chemistry under Antoine Lavoisier. In 1802, he bought 95 acres on the Brandywine Creek in Delaware for about $6,700 and began building a gunpowder mill. Generation after generation, the family lived directly above the powder yards, in a house on the hill overlooking the stone mills below. His own father, Pierre Samuel DuPont, died in 1817 after helping fight a fire at that same mill. On March 19, 1818, the powder works exploded in a chain of blasts that killed around 34 workers and destroyed 5 buildings. The family's own home was damaged. The family stayed, and the company grew far beyond gunpowder into one of the largest industrial firms in America. Generations later, another DuPont made headlines for a very different kind of violence. In January of 1996, John DuPont shot and killed Olympic wrestling champion Dave Schultz on his own estate. A jury found him guilty of third-degree murder, but ruled him mentally ill, and he died in prison in 2010. Today, the family is in roughly its 9th generation, and one descendant, Eleuthère I DuPont, still sits on DuPont's board. Forbes recently estimated the family fortune at about $22 billion. Hearst. Around 9 o'clock on the night of February 4, 1974, several armed strangers kicked in the door of a Berkeley apartment, beat the boyfriend of a 19-year-old college student, and dragged her into the trunk of a car. Her name was Patricia Hearst, granddaughter of newspaper publisher William Randolph Hearst, and the group that took her called itself the Symbionese Liberation Army. Hearst is an English variant of Hearst, a topographic surname tied to a wood or a wooded hill. The fortune behind her began with her great-grandfather George Hearst, a self-taught prospector from Missouri who bought a share in Nevada's Ophir mine in 1859. The ranch land he bought at San Simeon, California in 1865 would later hold a hilltop estate widely known as Hearst Castle, built over 28 years with architect Julia Morgan, complete with its own private zoo. By April of 1974, a bank security camera caught Patricia Hearst robbing a San Francisco bank alongside her captors, rifle in hand. She was arrested in September of 1975, convicted of armed robbery, and served nearly 2 years before President Jimmy Carter commuted her sentence. In 2001, President Bill Clinton granted her a full pardon. Today, Forbes values the Hearst family above $21 billion, and William R. Hearst III chairs Hearst Corporation. Patricia's 19 months still leave the same unresolved question hanging over the family name: belief or fear? Rockefeller. The surname is an Americanized form of the German Rockefeller, tied to the Rhineland village of Rockenfeld. The family's first American ancestor, Johann Peter Rockefeller, crossed the ocean in 1723. John Davison Rockefeller grew up in upstate New York before the family moved to Ohio, and even as a teenager, he kept a small account book, later known as Ledger A, recording every wage, expense, and charitable gift down to the penny, a habit tied to the tithing his family practiced. In 1870, Rockefeller and his partners organized Standard Oil in Ohio, and the family name entered the national conversation almost overnight. What turned that fortune into a dynasty was what came after. John D. Rockefeller Jr. and his wife Abby Aldrich Rockefeller raised 6 children, among them Nelson, who became governor of New York and later vice president, and Winthrop, who became governor of Arkansas. Their siblings built museums, parks, and philanthropic foundations that still carry the family name. The Rockefellers remain active today through family foundations and organizations, now in roughly their 7th generation, with Forbes recently placing the family fortune at about $12.5 billion. Roosevelt. Klaus Martensen van Roosevelt, a Dutch farmer whose surname traces to a Dutch place name often interpreted as Rosefield, arrived in New Amsterdam sometime between 1638 and 1649 and bought roughly 50 acres of farmland in what is now the middle of Manhattan, land that today includes the site of the Empire State Building. His descendants split into 2 branches, the Oyster Bay Roosevelts, mostly Republican, and the Hyde Park Roosevelts, mostly Democratic, and for generations, the 2 sides barely spoke the same political language. On March 17, 1905, those branches came back together in a New York townhouse, when the sitting president of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, walked his niece Eleanor down the aisle and gave her away in marriage to a young law student named Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Theodore and Franklin were fifth cousins. Because Eleanor was Theodore's niece, she and her new husband were fifth cousins once removed, sharing only a sliver of the same ancestry, despite decades of gossip suggesting something closer. Franklin went on to be elected president 4 separate times, something no other American has done before or since. The Roosevelt line continues today, but between Theodore and Franklin, a Roosevelt occupied the White House for nearly 20 of the 20th century's first 45 years. Morgan. A 1903 portrait by photographer Edward Steichen shows financier J. Pierpont Morgan glaring directly into the camera, gripping the metal arm of his chair so tightly that a glint of light made it look like a dagger in his hand. Morgan reportedly tore up the first proof of that image, though he later changed his mind and ordered prints made. Morgan is an Old Welsh surname, drawn from the medieval personal name Morgan. In this American line, Miles Morgan, a Welsh farmer's son, landed in Massachusetts Bay Colony in April of 1636 at the age of 20, and later generations worked as constables, land surveyors, and farmers in rural New England. That changed with Junius Spencer Morgan, who built a transatlantic banking house in London and personally directed his son Pierpont's education and early career. When Junius died in a carriage accident in 1890, Pierpont inherited around $15 million and used it to expand the bank that would carry the family name into the 20th century. Pierpont's private library of rare books and manuscripts, built over decades, eventually became a public institution in New York that still bears his name. Living descendants include great-great-granddaughter Quincy Adams Morgan, while the bank itself is run today by executives with no blood tie to the family at all. At what point does a dynasty's name become only a brand? Mellon. How does a family end up funding one of the world's great art museums and asking that its own name be kept off the front of the building? Mellon is an Ulster-Irish variant of Malin. Thomas Mellon left Camp Hill Cottage in County Tyrone for Pennsylvania in 1818, 5 years old, sailing with his family across the Atlantic. He later wrote in his memoirs that an old wooden cane, passed down from father to son since the family's years in Ireland and Scotland, marked the line's continuity. His son Andrew Mellon built the family banking fortune further, helped found companies including Alcoa and Gulf Oil, and served as United States Secretary of the Treasury from 1921 to 1932. In December of 1936, Andrew Mellon offered the federal government his entire art collection, valued at an estimated $25 million, along with $15 million to build a museum to house it. He died in August of 1937, just months after construction began, and never saw the finished building. His son Paul presented the gift to the nation on his behalf when the National Gallery of Art opened in Washington in March of 1941, before roughly 9,000 guests. In 1967, the Mellon Institute merged with Carnegie's old technical school to form Carnegie Mellon University. Today, Richard A. Mellon chairs a family foundation whose board still includes several Mellon descendants. Had Andrew Mellon put his own name on the National Gallery instead, the surname might mean something different in Washington today. Kennedy. The Kennedy surname is an anglicized form of the Irish O'Ciannady. In October of 1848, Patrick Kennedy, in his mid-20s, left Dunganstown, County Wexford, a family that grew barley for a local brewery rather than potatoes, but with no land or prospects left for a third son under Ireland's British landlords. He sailed for Boston aboard a ship called the Washington Irving, held below deck with the other steerage passengers, and fed little more than salted herring, moldy cheese, and stale biscuit, and arrived in Boston that same November. Patrick settled in East Boston, worked as a cooper, and died young, around 35, leaving his wife with 4 small children. In 1938, his great-grandson, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., took on a very public family role as America's ambassador to Britain, after building the fortune that gave his own children room to pursue politics. Over the following decades, Kennedys held congressional seats, Senate seats, ambassadorships, and the presidency itself. Patrick Kennedy died on November 22, 1858. His great-grandson, President John F. Kennedy, was assassinated in Dallas on November 22, 1963. Today, Caroline Kennedy is a former American ambassador, and other descendants remain in public life. Had Patrick Kennedy stayed in County Wexford, the family line that produced a president shot dead 105 years to the day after Patrick's own death might never have become an American political dynasty. If you like this video, subscribe for more like it.